Good day. My last programme, I discussed US Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland's visit to Moscow, a visit that was supposed to last 3 days, which did in fact last 3 days, and I discussed her disastrous first meeting with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, where the United States turned out to be unwilling or unable to listen to Russian concerns about the state of diplomatic representation by Russia in the United States and by the United States in Russia, that level of diplomatic representation being at a dire point in both countries. Anyway, Nuland has had further meetings since then with senior Russian officials of the Russian government and of the Russian Executive Office, that's to say Putin's personal secretariat, and it is now absolutely clear as crystal that these meetings have gone extremely badly. I say that because there is one thing which, to my mind, puts the fact that the meetings went badly beyond doubt. That is that neither government, neither foreign ministry has published readouts of Nuland's meetings with Russian officials. We've had no readouts from the Kremlin, from the Russian government, from the Russian foreign ministry, and no readouts from the State Department of any of Nuland's meetings with any Russian officials. Now that is really most remarkable and very extraordinary, and suggests that the meetings were extremely tense and it went extremely badly. I say that because the normal reason for withholding a readout is because the two sides are both agreed that publication of a readout would simply highlight how intense the disagreements were and how bad relations have become, and might therefore be seized upon by various people in each country as a reason for making those relations even worse than they were previously. I would add that not only have there been no readouts of Nuland's meetings with Russian officials, there have been no press conferences either. And that, of course, also takes us back to the underlying issue that if there's no press conferences, it's usually and always a sign of intense disagreements. Now, in the absence of any actual readouts from the the two governments about what happened when Nuland went to Moscow, we are left with press commentary, all of which so far has appeared in the Russian media. The US media, for its part, has virtually ignored Nuland's visit, even though, as I said, she was actually in Moscow for 3 days. And we have, most importantly and most interestingly, a long article in the Russian newspaper Nezavismaya Gazeta, which reads as follows. The much-anticipated 3-day visit of US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, has concluded, and experts say it brought less solutions than expected and even showed that there is room for potential conflict escalation. The visit was not marked by any important agreements on even one of the sticking points in Russian-American relations. Nuland met Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, aide to the President of the Russian Federation Yuri Ushakov, as well as with the Deputy Head of the Presidential Administration, Dmitry Kozak. Not a single meeting was followed by a joint press conference, a sign that there were no solid agreements reached. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that it would take time for relations to get back on track and that it is not possible to fix them right away. Chief researcher at the Institute of the United States and Canada Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Vladimir Vasilyev, told Nezavisimaya Gazeta that it is possible that Nuland came to Moscow with suggestions from the Biden administration on bilateral relations. Maybe it was about changing who has been blacklisted or about some sort of compromise on the work of the embassies. However, at the last moment, when it was already too late to cancel the visit, something happened. Kommersant, which is another Russian newspaper, we spoke with Deputy Director of the Centre for Comprehensive European and International Studies at the Higher School of Economics, Dmitry Suslov, who said that both countries were flexible in their approach because of a common understanding that steps needed to be taken to avoid any further escalation. Director of the Carnegie Moscow Center, Dmitry Trenin, told Kommersant that there is still a strong negative attitude towards Russia in the US Congress. It is believed that Russian diplomatic representatives are involved in espionage activities. Both Suslov and Trenin believe that a political decision by the heads of state is what will bring about a change in bilateral relations. Now, I should say that the three experts that Nezavisimaya Gazeta and Kommersant consulted, Vasiliev, Trenin and Suslov, are three absolute heavyweights in Russian international affairs commentary. They're the sort of people who you regularly see turning up in major centres, and what they say is often to be treated as highly authoritative. I say that, though I should stress that, as far as I know, Mr. Trenin is based in the United States, but Mr. Vasiliev and Mr. Suslov are both based in Russia. And it's not just these heavyweight commentators who are weighing in and who are saying that no real progress was achieved. We also have something similar from an official, a senior official of the Russian government, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, who also, of course, was one of the people that Victoria Nuland spoke to. And Ryabkov has given an interview to RT in which he has said, or is reported to have said, the following. We have produced some measured results in the final form of agreeing to consult further at a lower level to deal with the most expressing issues on the extraordinarily difficult, troubling agenda that we face. One of the problems we see now is an endless series of American demands. I would call them ultimatums for us to adjust our diplomatic presence in the United States according to US wishes. There is no flexibility. They only want us to reduce our levels. If this continues, Russia may even freeze the function of diplomatic missions in both countries, which is a solution Moscow does not want and has warned against, but that may be inevitable due to US intransigence. And then, of course, we learn from this interview with RT that there are to be lower-level expert committees and that these could make some progress on bilateral irritants, that the US and Russia might be able to cooperate productively on some issues of cybersecurity, to regional security, to the Korean problems in the Korean Peninsula, Afghanistan, Syria and Iran, as well as trade and investment, and that Moscow has clearly briefed the US on its position regarding strategic arms control with an eye to replacing the New START treaty within the next 4 years. However, in relation to arms control, we also learned from Ryabkov's interview with RT that the United States, the Biden-Harris administration, is still in the process of deciding what its policy with respect to arms control is going to be. And we will see further down the road how serious Ryabkov is, how serious the United States is. Ryabkov is reported to have told RT. We learn from another Russian official who is Dmitry Kozak, who is Putin's deputy chief of staff, that there was also what Kozak calls a thorough and constructive dialogue regarding the settlement of the conflict in southeast Ukraine, and that during the talks the US confirmed its position that significant progress toward the settlement of the conflict is unlikely without any agreement on future parameters of Donbass autonomy. In other words, giving the region a special status within Ukraine. Now, one Russian commentator, who is another very high-profile journalist, Fyodor Lukyanov, appears to have seized on that. He's written a long article for RT in which he appears to suggest that the United States might be trying to find some way of diffusing the Ukrainian crisis, recognizing that this has become the major sticking point in relations. And I'm going to read some parts of Lukyanov's article. And he says the following: President Biden and his administration are seeking to secure the Russia-Ukraine status quo, avoiding escalation, especially when it comes to Donbass. I would even go so far as to say the White House is ready to exercise its leverage with Kiev, particularly since President Volodymyr Zelensky's recent change of political character has come as a surprise even to the US, which had high hopes for him as a liberal reformer. And then Lukyanov goes on to discuss the way in which Zelensky has disappointed the Americans by turning out to be a nationalist hardliner who's clamping down on his opponents and is talking up the Russian threat, and that this is worrying and alarming to Washington. That, well, at least that's what Lukyanov appears to believe. And then he goes on to say that this is unnerving for Washington, let alone the fact that it has been tired of Ukraine for quite some time. Victoria Nuland knows the ins and outs of Ukrainian politics and the quality of its leadership like nobody else. Deep mistrust of Russia combined with skepticism towards the capacity of Kiev's elites is pushing the United States towards some kind of fail-safe system. Well, hope, as they say, springs eternal. I don't agree with Lukyanov's hopes on this issue. I don't get the sense that there's been any real shift in US policy. The US always says in public and in direct conversations with the Russians that it supports the Minsk agreement that was reached in 2015, which requires Ukraine to grant special status to the Donbass region and supposedly requires Ukraine to enact a law that will agree or set out that special status. The United States always says it supports that. In practice, the United States has done absolutely nothing to put that proposal, that agreement, into action. And in fact, the point about Nuland agreeing that some kind of grant of special status to the Donbass republics is essential is one that all parties, including Ukraine, appear to agree to. But of course, Ukraine refuses to negotiate the terms of that special status with the two Donbass republics, even though it is required to do so as a result of the February 2015 Minsk agreement. Instead, it persists in trying to determine that special status unilaterally by itself in the most minimalist ways. And there is no sign at all that the United States is interested or prepared to pressure Ukraine to change that position. Now, I would say that I happen to agree with Lukyanov to this extent. I also believe that at this precise moment in time, the United States does not want to see a war in eastern Ukraine. But the reason it doesn't want to see a war in eastern Ukraine is not because it has fundamentally rethought the United States' Ukraine policy, or because it wants to solve the Ukrainian issue, or at least put it on ice in order to find some way towards improving relations with Russia. It doesn't want a war in Ukraine because, as it discovered in April, if there was such a war, Russia would intervene and Ukraine would be destroyed, and the Biden-Harris administration, so soon after the debacle in Afghanistan and with a growing crisis in the Pacific over Taiwan, does not want another debacle on its hands in Ukraine with another American ally going under. So that is, to my mind, the only factor, the only consideration at the moment which is driving US policy. They don't want to see the situation in Ukraine get out of hand. They certainly don't want to see a war there, but they're certainly not prepared to take any step at all that would edge Ukraine towards settlement and which might actually seriously diffuse the relationship between Ukraine and Russia in a way that might lead to a possible improvement in relations between the United States and Russia. And that, of course, sums up the whole state of affairs with Nuland's visit to Russia. The Americans came to Moscow, they had talks, they spoke with people like Kozak, with Ryabkov, with Overchuk, and absolutely no progress was made at all. And in fact, as I said, we get the impression of tense meetings and no movement. And that, of course, begs the question of why, in that case, did Nuland go to Moscow? What was the point for the administration of sending Nuland eastward? And here I have to say, I myself, for once, struggle to come up with a coherent answer. The United States government, at the moment, the Biden-Harris administration, does seem to be in the habit of sending various officials to various capitals. As I said, we saw that with Wendy Sherman's visit to China a few months ago. We see that with Nuland going to Moscow. There seems to be some attempt to talk to the Chinese and the Russians. There seem to be, as we've learned from Ryabkov, endless demands from the United States. But we don't really see any sign of progress at all. The Americans only come to lecture. They don't come with any proposal in mind, and they don't seem to be capable of formulating any proposal. And we see this in relation to another meeting between a senior Russian and American officials, which has this time taken place in the United States. And it relates to the visit to the United States of a Russian Deputy Prime Minister, Alexei Overchuk. Now, Overchuk is the Russian government's official, the Russian government official, who is most involved in trade policy. And the reason he went to the United States was nothing to do with political issues. He went there specifically in order to discuss energy issues. The United States is now in the embarrassing position of having to buy oil from Russia and may very soon have to buy liquefied natural gas from Russia also. And with inflation in the United States and elsewhere now raging out of control, they also want the Russians to increase oil and gas production and to help with lowering energy prices. So Overchuk is partly in the United States to talk about those sort of things, but he was also in the United States in order to have a discussion with various American business leaders, with US companies who are or might be in better circumstances interested in investing in Russia and developing an economic and commercial relationship with Russia. Anyway, whilst Overchuk was in the United States, he met with Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, and he also met with the Biden-Harris administration's climate czar, John Kerry. And this time, the State Department has provided a readout, and it reads as follows. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman and Undersecretary for Economic Affairs Jose Fernandez met today with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk to reinforce the United States' commitment to a stable and predictable bilateral relationship. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John F. Kerry separately met with Deputy Prime Minister Overchuk today and repeated his call for Russia to take more robust action on climate. Deputy Secretary Sherman called on Russia to do more to ensure energy security, whilst also echoing Secretary Kerry's call for it to submit a strengthened nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement by the time COP26 meets on October 31st. Deputy Secretary Sherman and Undersecretary Fernandez urged Russia to ensure fair treatment for US companies in its marketplace and to resolve US concerns about Russia's trade and investment climate. Deputy Secretary Sherman also underscored continued US commitment to freedom of expression online. Well, perhaps something strikes you all listening to that readout, which is that it is nothing more than a list of demands. We hear that the Americans made demands of the Russians on climate change. They want the Russians to come up with a plan for climate change in Russia by the 31st of October. They want equal and fair access, as they call it, to US companies in the Russian marketplace. They want Russia to take steps to resolve Russia's trade and investment climate. And they also demanded that the United States, that Russia make commitments to what the United States calls freedom of expression online. In other words, no Russian censorship of US, or what the US calls Russian censorship of big tech, US tech companies. Note that nowhere in this readout is there any comment about anything that Overchuk, the Russian Deputy Prime Minister, said in reply. And in fact, it's just a list of demands, and it shows no sign of any willingness to discuss or talk about things with the Russians on any kind of sensible or serious issue. Now, we also know that the Russians, copying what the Chinese did in Tianjin, also apparently gave the Americans a list of demands over the course of Nuland's visit. And apparently she was given, just as the Chinese gave Wendy Sherman, lists of things that the Russians want the Americans to do in order to improve relations. So the Russians gave Nuland, lists of demands that the United States must do to improve relations. But it's absolutely clear that the relationship between the United States and Russia is in deadlock. So I'm going to come back to what I am saying. I don't see any point or purpose in diplomatic exchanges between the Russians and the Americans at this time. I don't really see what is achieved by the Americans and the Russians meeting and disagreeing with each other. On the contrary, all it is doing, it seems to me, is causing each side to come away with more angry with the other, which is why we don't see press conferences and we don't see readouts, and without any real or substantive progress being made on any issue. So in light of this, I think that the best thing to do is for the Russians and for the Americans simply to stop talking to each other, and for the Russians to do what they have talked about, or what Ryabkov talks about, which is to freeze, to close down, in effect, the embassies, the American embassy in Washington and the Russian embassy in the Russian embassy in Washington and the US embassy in Moscow. In other words, to freeze relations to the point where they are at the moment. And that, it seems to me, is the logical and obvious step for the United States and Russia to take. Because when there is no agreement, there is no point in discussion. Until the moment finally comes when the United States understands that it must undertake some give, there is really no point in the Americans and the Russians speaking to each other. The Russians have made it very clear now in various meetings, including the Geneva summit, that they're not prepared to make any substantive concessions on any substantive issue to the Americans at all. Even on climate change, it is divisive because clearly, though the Russians support in general the overall agenda on climate change, as by the way do the Chinese, it seems to me that it is a trap for them to get into discussions with the Americans on the topic, because it then leads the Russians into discussions where the Americans, as we've just seen with this readout of the meeting with Overchuk, where the Americans feel they're able to pronounce lectures towards the Russians. So given that this is so, the best thing to do, it seems to me, is to accept the reality. There is deadlock in relations. There is no progress of any kind being made. There is no point in having these meetings, and those meetings should stop. And as for Ukraine, well, that situation, it seems to me, is going to fester, but there it is. Better let it fester than that the two countries, the United States and Russia, should argue with each other about it. That seems to me to be the position at the moment. I don't really see any purpose in conducting these discussions. If the purpose of sending Victoria Nuland to Moscow was to try to get the Russians to budge, they have obviously not done so. If the purpose of sending Mr. Overchuk to Washington was to see whether some kind of agreements could be reached on economic and trade policy, well, that hasn't happened either. What we get instead are demands and ultimatums from the Americans, lists of demands from the Russians, refusals by either side to work with the other. Anyway, a debacle of a visit which, in my opinion, has made matters worse. And we have to accept and acknowledge the possibility that that might have been the purpose of the visit. I said right at the beginning, earlier in this programme, that I was struggling to understand exactly why Victoria Nuland actually was sent to Moscow at this time. I mean, it could be, we discussed it, Alex Christoforou and I, in our programme, in our main channel, the Duran, that part of the purpose of Nuland's visit was to review the state of the US embassy there and what is apparently the collapse of the US intelligence gathering operation in Russia. So it may be that that was part of what was part of the purpose of Nuland's visit. But I have to say that given the intensity of her talks and meetings with Russian officials, doesn't seem to me as if there's been, she kind of had much time to do that. It seems to me more likely that coming from someone like Nuland, the true purpose of the Nuland's visit to Moscow was to make the situation worse, to make it clear to the Russians that the US is completely uncompromising, and basically to push relations between Russia and the United States further into a corner. I say that because, as I've also discussed in recent programs, there's been something of a debate in the United States about whether the United States should be making concessions to the Russians in order to draw them away from their current de facto alliance with China. The United States, or some people in the United States, being aware that the Russian-Chinese alliance creates enormous problems strategic problems for the United States as it struggles to meet its commitments in various places. Well, Nuland has never been very interested in China. Her obsession and the fixation of those neocons, that neocon lobby, which she represents, has always been Russia. I suspect that the reason she went to Moscow is precisely in order to engineer a further deterioration in relations with the Russians in order to defeat the faction in Washington that calls for better relations with Russia as a means of isolating China. Well, if that is the objective, Nuland has achieved it because, as I said, there's every indication that what these talks have done is made what was already a bad situation worse. But if so, and I have to say this again, if so, then the net effect will be a deeper relationship, a closer alliance between China and Russia, and I cannot see for the life of me how that is better for the United States. But there it is. That is the net effect of Victoria Nuland's trip to Moscow. Maybe she did this intentionally. Maybe the Americans are completely misguided and they seriously think or believe that if they send somebody like Nuland to Moscow, the Russians will crack and will agree to what the Americans want. Either way, it's clear to me that US-Russian relations are at a total impasse, and over the next few months, they're going to get worse. The only winners out of this, apart from some increasingly influential hardline people in Moscow, and of course the neocons in Washington, but the big winners of this, to be absolutely clear, are the Politburo in Beijing. Well, thank you for joining me for this program today. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. And also you can check us out on that channel, and you can also check out Alex's channel. You find links under this video. And also please remember to come to our other community, the Duran community on the Locals platform. You find a link under this video. We have a thriving community there. We're publishing increasing amounts of exclusive content. You will find all sorts of new things appearing there regularly and all the time. And of course, you can also interact with us on that platform. Lastly, or further, you can find us too on other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, Odyssey, and of course the new free speech platform SuperU. You can also support us via Patreon and Subscribestar, and you can also support us by coming to our shop, buying the amazing things you will find there, our famous magic mugs, this one with the flag of the United States, our hats, our hoodies, sweatshirts, t-shirts, long sleeved and short sleeved, and all the rest. And lastly, if you like this video, please remember to press the like button and also check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon, and have a wonderful day until then.